Hello and welcome back to Highway to Hoover, a production of SEC Extra over at D1Baseball.com. I'm your host, Joe Healy, joined today by my good friend Alan Cole of Gamecock Scoop. We're going to talk about South Carolina's first 4 weeks of the season, non-conference play, as they move into SEC play this weekend. I think I speak for everyone when we're all ready to move on to SEC play because the non-conference in the league was a little less than inspiring over the last 4 weeks. So looking forward to that. Before we jump into anything with our guest, though, I have to let you know that this episode of Highway to Hoover and every episode of Highway to Hoover this season is brought to you by Academy Sports and Outdoors. Get ready for a new season of fishing fun with Academy Sports and Outdoors and reel in the best gear at low prices every day. Plus, Academy offers easy ways to shop and save time, like free 1-hour in-store or curbside pickup on academy.com orders. First things first, Alan, thank you for joining us today, or joining me today. We talked about it offline, but I felt it was very important to get you on here before Dawn Staley and the South Carolina women's basketball team monopolizes your time over the next, let's call it a month or so.
Yeah, that feels like a good bet. There's a very real chance I'll wake up after the last basketball game and we're 4 weeks into SEC play already. So that's happened before.
Yeah, so happy to have you on now, so we can kind of get caught up on where we are with the Gamecocks. I guess let's start with the most recent result. What is there anything we can make of the Morehead State series? Just kind of felt weird to me that you know they won a couple of high scoring games and then they win a 1-0 on Sunday. What do you got on that series? Is that one we just kind of flush and move on from? Because I gotta be honest, I don't have a clue what to make of it.
Yeah, I generally lean towards the flush and move on, especially when you're starting SEC play and, we're recording this Tuesday. So 3 days, it's just not going to matter after whatever happens this weekend. But if there is a takeaway, it's just you still have some starting pitching questions. I mean, don't let the 1-0 on Sunday fool you either. Dylan Eskew got through 3+ innings. It got pulled in the fourth with some command issues. And then obviously the scores on Friday and Saturday speak for itself that your starting pitching struggled. So that's concerning, especially after it was pretty good most of the Clemson series. But that'd be my one. It's just that you still have some pitchers you like, but it's going to be hard to piece together 81 outs in a given SEC weekend with what you do have overall.
Yeah, you mentioned the Clemson series. That was actually where I was going to go next, because I think I have a take, and you can tell me where you land on this take, that there was something actually more demoralizing for South Carolina about the fact that they didn't play that poorly against Clemson. And yet it was just clear that Clemson was the superior team from minute 1 to the end of the series. And to me, again, if they'd have played poorly and kicked the ball around or whatever, you could at least kind of, have an excuse for well, if we play better, we're right there. But this wasn't that. They just got outplayed for 27 innings, and there's almost that's almost harder, because it's just I don't know where, there's really nothing you can point to of hey, if we'd have just done this or that, it would have been different. That wasn't the case.
No, I'm with you completely, and I wrote about it. I think even in the larger scope, probably beyond this podcast, I think Clemson's just a better program right now with recruiting and development and in-state recruiting and all the other stuff that's beyond the scope of a 20-minute, 30-minute SEC podcast today. But they all three of those games were reasonably tight. It was a 5-3 game Friday. Saturday and Sunday got away with some insurance runs, but it was 2-1 after 8 Saturday and 1-0 after 7 in Sunday's game, but just couldn't get the big hit. Again, your pitching was good. Clemson's was better that weekend. I walked out of the park Friday last weekend with a little bit of optimism because they got down in a hole early and they battled back, and they missed tying the game by about a foot on a homer, or I guess a warning track fly out in the 9th. And then Saturday and Sunday happened, and all that's just gone.
Yeah, it was. I listened to most of that Friday game as I was driving home from the game that I was at, and it just, it felt like that result could have kind of changed the entire weekend. But that's baseball. Yeah. I've been impressed. We'll start here when we talk about individual performances. I've been impressed so far by the fact that it doesn't appear that Ethan Petry is pressing in any way or trying to do too much. And he's just kind of just been himself, which is good enough, obviously, because I think in a different scenario, it'd be very easy for someone to go in there and kind of look at it as all right, I'm the guy that makes this offense go. I got to put things on my own shoulders. And then you look up and it's a bunch of strikeouts and it's, maybe some power, but not a lot of field to hit, walks, and none of that's been the case. Like, that's been incredibly impressive to me through 4 weeks.
No, he's right there. He's, you talk about he's currently chasing Justin Smoke's program home run record. He's 13 away now. He's at 49. Smoke at 62. Yeah, he's not pressing at all. He looks like Ethan Petry, like you said. And for an offense that hasn't been able to count on a lot so far, Petry's got 5 homers. He leads the team in that category and RBIs. All the peripherals are what you'd want them to be. He's played pretty good defense, mostly at first base, a little bit of right field. Yeah, he looks like a I'm not a draft scout, but he looks like a first round pick, which is obviously what this team is going to need for the next 10 weekends.
What have you seen from Nathan Hall so far? Because I'm a little bit of a Nathan Hall wonk, if you will, because I saw him at Clemson the last couple of years, and you're like, man, that physically, that's what it looks like. It has size and strength, and he can run, and it's not just that he's a fast runner; it's that he's just like really long strides. Looks like, kind of like gazelle quality to him, and it seems like he's putting it all together. Again, we'll see what happens with SEC pitching, but so far it seems like, if you want to point to someone else that's been really his reason for optimism offensively, it's been him.
Yeah, for sure. He's Paul Mainieri said all fall, even during preseason in January, this guy's going to be able to put it all together. Obviously, he had a Monty Lee connection from Clemson. That's who originally recruited him to college. That all the tools were there, and he was to give Paul credit. He was pretty adamant since the fall that Nathan Hall's going to be this team's leadoff hitter, and it's going to work. And right, he's hitting leadoff in every game so far this year. He's hitting over 400. Again, the peripherals, the on base percentage, all that are what you'd want them to be. He's leading the team in stolen bases, like you mentioned. He's he's doing everything you'd want a leadoff hitter to do. And again, I think one of the things people don't realize is that this team is 17 games in and they've used 17 different lineups. They've been changing things every day, but the only 2 spots that have stayed every single game is Hall's hit first and Petry's hit third, and it's just everything around them that's had to change or just been changed because.
Henry Kazmar was someone who was a pretty high profile transfer in the portal, and I thought it was a big get for South Carolina, and still is, and could be. Maybe he wasn't the flashiest guy out there, right? But at least I felt like we kind of know exactly what they're going to get from him. So far, it has not been that. What have you gotten so far? Because I'm sure it's been asked in post games and what have you. What have you gotten so far about Kazmar's slow start and the optimism about him coming out of it?
Yeah, there's still some optimism. It has gotten better. I think it was going into the Clemson series, coming out of the Clemson series. I think he only had 5 hits all season coming out of that, and it's gotten a little bit better the last week. He's up to 11 now, so he's more than double that. Again, they played Morehead State over the weekend, and then it was Davidson and Citadel last midweek. So it counts for the quality of pitching he's faced, but yeah, it's still not where you want it to be. I think the main thing is just the bat to ball hasn't been there. You thought, okay, it's a contact hitter. He put the ball in play, he can run a little bit. 11 strikeouts isn't oppressive right now through 15 starts for him, but the on base percentage is under 300, and it's just been. The bat just looks slow, and I'm not an expert, but he feels like he's having a kind of in between, right? He's behind on the fastballs, he's in front on the breaking balls, and it's just not happening for him. And then you didn't think he was going to be a big power threat anyway, but I think he's got 2 extra base hits all year. It's really, if he's getting on base, he's slapping a single somewhere.
Let's talk about catcher. We've put it off long enough.
Yeah.
I'm just going to leave it at that, Alan. Where are we at catcher for South Carolina?
Yeah, we talked about it offline kind of before the year started, that might be what sunk this team. And I don't know if it's sunk them yet, but you are still at the point where Talmadge LeCroy, the much maligned third baseman who was famous for all the wrong reasons for his defense at the end of last year at third, is your starting catcher. He had a little bit of background in that. He did a little bit as a freshman back in the Mark Kingston era. He's been okay. I wouldn't call it great, but it's passable back there. But he got banged up a little bit. He actually took a foul tip on opening day, and then he played through it a bit, re-aggravated it during the Clemson series, making a tag on a play at the plate. Didn't play for a few days. He's played 1 game since that re-aggravation that he started Sunday against Morehead State. But behind him, I mean, this is another thing that I felt going into the year okay that Max Coffer could be a serviceable backup. If nothing else, he's played in the SEC. kind of been a disaster. His one start, or he's got a few starts, but his most recent start was against Clemson on Sunday, and he had 3 pass balls, couldn't throw a guy out, stealing on a pitch out, didn't block a ball in the dirt with a guy on third that led to a run, and he hasn't started since. I don't know if he will start again the rest of the year back there. It was just that bad. And then Gavin Braylon, who's a freshman they like, he got hurt last week going after a foul ball, kind of ran into the dugout leg first. Don't know what the status is there. He didn't play over the weekend. Ryan Bakes, sophomore, can catch, has caught a little bit. Don't think you want that to be your primary catcher just because the offense is not there. It's a mess, to be honest with you. And I have to imagine every other SEC team can identify that's a mess. And whether even if you do have Lee Croy back there, who hasn't been terrible defensively, that's your best case right now, is not terrible defensively.
Well, and that's certainly, not to get ahead of ourselves in the conversation, but just like when you have Oklahoma coming into town to start SEC play, and that's kind of what they do.
Yep.
That's obviously a concern.
Yeah. The whole thing's a concern. And obviously the injury was affecting Talmadge swinging the bat. Talmadge LeCroy is never going to hit 400, but he's also hitting noticeably worse than he did even last year when he was struggling. So I have to imagine that thumb injury on his, swinging hand has played some part in that as well. And I think he's just going to have to play as long as he's healthy enough too, because I really don't think you can put anybody else back there.
Let's talk about the pitching, and I'll start with Jake McCoy, because I feel like maybe, and you can tell me because you're at the games, you see the context that I don't necessarily all the time, but it feels like his peripherals are such that the 4.74 ERA probably doesn't do him service, given that, he's not really giving up hits. It's a 167 opponent batting average. He's not giving up a bunch of home runs, which sometimes can kind of artificially inflate an ERA. He's not walking guys at an alarming rate necessarily. So, is that a situation where he's actually pitched pretty well, and a 4.74, which actually that's not terrible, obviously, but you would expect, given the peripherals, that the ERA would reflect that a little more, I guess.
Yeah, it actually just goes back to over the weekend, because the ERA was a lot more in line with where you would expect that to be. And then Saturday against Morehead State, and Paul Mainieri said it was just more to do with him sitting for a long time, which, I'll be honest, I wasn't at the game Saturday. It was women's basketball weekend. But just going back and watching it, South Carolina takes a 12-1 lead after 3. There's a very long bottom of the third where they score 7 runs, a couple pitching changes, like half an hour. McCoy sitting there, gives up 4, and I think only got 1 out after that. Gave up 4 runs in an inning. So, you look at this, he's given up 10 earned runs all year, and 4 of them more than 1 inning in his last start. So definitely he's pitched better than his line. The Clemson game, especially, he had a career high 12 strikeouts. He started the Saturday game of that series. Obviously against the best lineup he's faced this year. He kind of rose to the moment there and kept him in the game all the way. I think in terms of just stuff, he's the best maybe the best on the roster now that Eli Jersenbeck's hurt. Definitely the best of the 3 guys they currently have in the weekend rotation.
Is Brandon Stone just destined for the rotation? How much conversation has there been about that, if any?
Yeah, Mainieri was asked about that after Friday, because he came in relief after Matthew Becker struggled again, and he kind of steadied the ship there. I think that's going to happen eventually. I just think the stuff's too good for it not to be starting games. He started games. He's a JUCO transfer. He started games at the junior college level last year, so he's not unfamiliar with throwing 90, 100 pitches in a game. Obviously, he hasn't done it at this level, but no, the stuff's just too good. Again, you talk about numbers. I think he's only walked 3 batters this year. Also, I don't know if you have it open right now, but I think that's what the number was at. A lot of strikeouts, good pitching to contact. I think, again, if you talk about just who gives you the best chance to get 81 outs in a series, and who do you kind of let go through a lineup 2 or 3 times, I think he has to be up there. Whether it's on Sundays, you just swap him with Becker because he was already pitching on Fridays, kind of as that first guy out of the bullpen. But I think it has to be him sooner or later.
Well, and yeah, a couple of things there. One, you're correct. 3 walks this season, 23-3 strikeout to walk. The other thing is you just wonder if, Becker is proven as a reliever to some degree. So it's not like you're losing the value there. It's not like you'd remove him from the rotation and he would just disappear.
Right.
Somebody you could probably still get value from in a bullpen role. And my bigger point there is that, the idea of, in some order, you've got McCoy, who's shown his upside. You've got Stone, perhaps, and then Eskew, who we know is limited, but is a veteran, thrown a lot of innings, who's not going to, metaphorically speaking, light the stadium on fire in his starts. if you're going to be real optimistic about this team, like I think you could start there and say, look, that's at least the makings of a rotation that I think keeps them competitive week in and week out.
Yeah, I think the upside of this, as you said, obviously you're gonna have to hit a lot more, is what you saw in the Clemson series, where yeah, you lost 3 games to a better team, but all 3 of those games were within a run in the 8th inning, or I guess the 7th on Friday, the insurance run. But you were there in all those, and you were there because you're pitching. I mean, you pitched. I mean, Clemson's lineup's not as good as what you're going to see when Tennessee comes in here, or Florida later in the year, whatever. But it's still a really good lineup with an All-American and Canarella. And you pitched very well. That pretty much, I'm not gonna say the entire series. It got away from you Sunday in the 8th and 9th inning, but 90% of that series you pitched really well against a good lineup. And I think that's the if this is gonna work, that's what it's gonna look like. Is it's gonna be pitching keeping you in games, and you win some 4-3, some 5-4 type games in SEC play.
Bigger picture question for you with Paul Mainieri back in the big chair here in the SEC. I mean, first off, just good to see. I think he's kind of universally just loved in college baseball.
Mhm.
A decent human being and someone who is in coaching for a lot of the right reasons. But it's a very different college baseball world than the one he left even just 3 years ago, 4 years ago at LSU. And I'm sure he got asked about that in the preseason and leading up to the season. But how much has he talked about at all just kind of those differences and bridging the gap and adapting to this modern college baseball world? Because I think, and you could tell me, I feel like that's, if you're South Carolina fans, that is a thing they were most apprehensive about when the hiring was made back in the summer.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm assuming you're talking about partly just the NIL and that
Right.
aspect of recruiting, but also just baseball itself's different. You got to hit 100 homers in a season to have a chance now, and the game's played differently. Obviously, it's been talked about a lot, and kind of his answer pretty steadily since he got here in June has been he's learning, he's getting up to speed. He's going to have to rely on people he trusts who have been in college baseball, maybe during that transition period. Terry Rooney is a pitching coach, obviously with him for a long time at LSU there, got him on staff here. Monty Lee's the big one. That was keeping him around was a priority for I guess now the former AD Ray Tanner, but for Mainieri as well. That's a guy who's obviously a state of South Carolina lifer who can recruit, can be around, has been in college baseball while Paul hasn't. So I still have questions about how that's going to go long term, and you're going to have to wait and see how the recruiting classes go and what the transfer portal looks like this summer. I think it can work. I think again, you go bigger picture. This is always going to be a quick fix, get this back on track if it goes well. I don't think anybody thinks Paul Mainieri is going to be here in 10 years and maybe not even 5, just with his age and where this is. So, and especially because the guy who hired him is already retired, and Ray Tanner, and he was very vocal about he wanted to work with Ray Tanner again because he had so much respect for him. Well, there's a new AD now, and a new AD who didn't hire him. So, if this doesn't go well, if he's already pushing 70 years old, I don't think this is a long-term thing, but I think it can work in the short term, even if maybe the short term doesn't mean 2025.
Yeah, that's an interesting, and there's no question here because you and I, neither of us know, but just like that'll be an interesting dynamic with Ray Tanner not in that seat anymore. What that evolves into from a working relationship
Yeah.
standpoint, and all of that jazz. Last thing for you. We mentioned Oklahoma coming in this weekend. How important is that series? As some of you and I talked about offline, just for getting off to a decent start here, and what are things that you're kind of looking for as we head to the ballpark and into SEC play?
Yeah, I hate to put so much on, games 1, 2, and 3 of a 30-game schedule, but dude, just look at the rest of the schedule. I mean, they're going to Arkansas next weekend. They got Tennessee coming in here the weekend after that. Then you got to go to Mississippi State, which maybe that's not as good as those last 2 teams I mentioned, but it's still obviously a really tough place to play. Then you go to A&M, who's struggling, but it's still A&M. Like, you can bury yourself pretty quickly. I know there's no easy SEC schedule, but I'm going to use air quotes, lightens up after that. You're going to get Ole Miss at your place. You get road trips at Kentucky and Auburn, which is not as bad as some of the other SEC road trips you can take. But if you're 3-12 the term, it doesn't matter. So I think it's huge. I mean, you got a series at your ballpark against a team that I think is pretty good, but I don't think is as good as maybe their record or their ranking, and has shown some problems this year. I think, yeah, I'm not going to call it a must-win series because I just don't really believe in that the second week of March. But I think it's pretty close. Like, I think if you can't win the series this weekend, the math gets late really early, especially with what's the next 2 weekends.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. Like, I'm totally with you. You've got plenty of season in front of you, but it is, it is going to be a little bit, I feel like, a litmus test for
Yep.
the rest of the schedule, because if for some reason Oklahoma just totally outclasses you, I think it could portend some negative things. On the flip side, if Carolina takes care of business at home, then you're like, okay, the second half of that schedule is pretty similar to that, and maybe we just need to tread water until we get to that.
That's a better way to put it. I don't want to make it sound easy, but the teams you have on the back half are similar to Oklahoma, I think, whether that's an Ole Miss, a Kentucky, and Auburn, even Mississippi State in week 4 is, I don't think, that different than Oklahoma, just in terms of overall talent. So I think you hit it right. And then as for the second part of your question that I didn't answer, what I'm looking for this weekend is talk about the offense for me. I mean, you've faced one really good staff this season, and the offense completely bombed out that weekend. You scored 3, 1, and 2 in those 3 games against Clemson. So I think it kind of begins and ends there. We already talked about the pitching. Obviously, you have to pitch well to win SEC games, but if you come out of this weekend with 6 runs in 3 games, it just isn't going to matter what happens on the mound. So that's what I'm looking at, is especially like you mentioned, guys like Kazmar. I'm kind of interested in Kennedy Jones, who's been banged up as well, but he's back in the lineup now. See what he can do. He's got that cleanup spot protecting Petry. Yeah, you got to hit this weekend. That's kind of what I'm keeping an eye on.
I think that's all fair. I think the other thing is you just can't have a lot of traffic on the bases given the questions at catcher and what have you. Like, Oklahoma loves to just gum up the gears on the bases and make you have to think about a million different things, secondary leadoffs and stolen bases and hit and run. And, oh yeah, I got to pitch the batter too. Like, it's just, it can really speed up on a team. So yeah, I think it's gonna be a fascinating series. Obviously not the most high profile series on the schedule, but you could make an argument that it is among the most important given the station those two teams are kind of occupy within the SEC pecking order. So, all right. That is an episode, folks. First off, Alan, thank you for joining us today. Looking forward to seeing you and talking with you down the road.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to it. Yeah, I'm very interested in that series this weekend. Just no idea what to realistically expect, which is always what you want for the start of SEC play.
That's right. Yeah. For folks like us who just get to enjoy it and write about it, that's a lot of fun. For the dugouts, I'm sure it's a little more nerve wracking, but you and I just get to kind of sit back and watch it play out. So should be a lot of fun indeed. All right. I want to thank Academy Sports and Outdoors for sponsoring this and every episode of Highway to Hoover. Thank you also to Covis Boots, one of our other sponsors here for Highway to Hoover and the D1 Baseball Podcast. Thank you again to Alan Cole of Gamecock Scoop for joining us today. Alan's, in my mind, that one of the best in the SEC doing it out there covering baseball on a local level. So make sure you're following his work, not only if you're a South Carolina fan, but also if you just want to, some good beat writing on one of your rivals in the league. Gamecock Scoop, Alan Cole. That's someone you should be reading. So appreciate that. And thank you, the listener, for listening. We'll talk to you soon.